Now we come to the second great heresy, which, unlike the Judaizers, did not start inside the church. This heresy started in paganism. We don't know exactly when or where. But this heresy came into the church from the outside, and we call it Gnosticism, which is spelled like this. Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, or possibly gnosis. In English, we don't pronounce the G. I don't know whether it's pronounced in Greek. I'm going to call it gnosis because that's the way I pronounce it. Gnosis means knowledge. And in Gnosticism, specifically, it means secret knowledge. Gnosticism, again, we don't know exactly where or when it started, but it probably started sometime around the time of the Incarnation. We don't know whether it was a bit before or a bit after. And it probably started somewhere around Persia or Mesopotamia. Again, we're not sure. Those are the most likely places. And it spread all the way from Spain to India. It was not restricted to the Roman Empire. The Gnostics believed in one supreme being. And this is all the Gnostics, not just the ones who claim to be Christians. One supreme God. I'm going to use a capital G because that's what they thought it was. I'm going to put it in quotes because they were wrong. And this supreme being of theirs, they said, was pure light, pure spiritual light. And from this supreme being came, I don't know whether this is later people using this term or whether the Gnostics themselves would have used it, but they call them emanations, which were also pure light, but lesser than the supreme being. And these, you'll see why in a moment why I'm doing this, they called aeons, which can also be spelled without that beginning A. And from these came more emanations, and more, and more, each layer coming from the one before, the one above. Eventually, there came an emanation which they called Sophia, which means wisdom. Which was not female, but somehow feminine. I don't understand it. Gnosticism is weird. And this Sophia wanted to make something of her own, something not an emanation from the supreme being. And she did. And this was called, they called it the demiurge. Which means something in Greek, I don't know what. And this demiurge, according to the Gnostics, was either stupid or evil. They disagreed on which. There were, again, many different groups of Gnostics, and they disagreed about several things. So some said the demiurge was stupid, some said it was evil, but the demiurge, I'm going to put some more, these are actually parts of circles and not just sparks. The demiurge created the material world, matter. So according to the Gnostics, the material world was created by something that was either stupid or evil, including man. And I'm going to put 3 men on this tiny little earth because they've said there were 3 kinds of men. We'll get to that in a moment. In the material world, they said some parts of this spiritual light, they didn't really distinguish between light and spirit very well, but bits of light or bits of spirit, which to them were pretty much the same thing, were trapped in the material world. And some of those lights, some of those bits of light were trapped in men. They called this the divine spark. You will hear this term used today, although most people don't mean it in a Gnostic way. But this is where it comes from. So this guy over here has a divine spark, which I'm going to draw over here and then just say it's in him. These people, the Gnostics called pneumatikoi. You don't need to, I'll spell that word, but you don't need to write it down. Pneuma means breath or spirit in Greek. So these were spiritual people. Others they called psychikoi, which means people with minds. Am I spelling this correctly? Let me check a book. I will be right back. I have a book. Yes, psychikoi. This is a K. It's just a bad one. And this last one, these are people with minds. So I'm sure you can guess what the last one is. I'll give you the Greek word. Again, you don't care about the Greek words right now. I'm just giving them to you in case you're interested. This is an S. The somatikoi were beastly, having neither mind nor spirit. Pure matter. Now, other things could have the divine spark too, including, amusingly, this is a pear. Translucent fruit. This led to some rather ridiculous things, which we will talk about later. Unless I forget, which is possible. So, we have aeons. Now, since they considered man, or at least spiritual man, to be a divine spark trapped in an evil material body, to the Gnostics, salvation meant having that spiritual divine spark escape from matter. But this divine spark, as long as it's trapped, is asleep. And it needs a spiritual messenger to come and bring secret knowledge from the spiritual world. To wake it up and to give the person a spiritual password or key. I'm drawing this as a key. Because in addition to the material world, the demiurge had created things called archons, which were evil spiritual beings. These are ditto marks, means the same thing. And each of these archons ruled a sphere. Now, the notion of spheres in astronomy didn't start with the Gnostics and what didn't actually belong to them, but they borrowed it. Some Gnostics said that there were 7 spheres, 7 heavens, which means they're using heavens in the sense of sky, not the way we use the word heaven. Some said there were as many as 365. And these 7 heavens, for those who thought there were 7, these corresponded to the orbits of the planets. But not everybody, again, they disagreed about that. They were inconsistent between the different groups. These archons were evil. And they didn't want to let the divine spark rise from the material world to the spiritual realm. So you had to have this secret knowledge, this key or password, and you had to have one for every single sphere, or you couldn't get through. And what happens if you can't get through? That's unclear. Maybe you come back and be trapped in matter again and have to start all over again. Maybe you're destroyed. Maybe you're stuck on that sphere forever. I have not been able to find out. I don't think they agreed on this. But once this spiritual messenger has come and given you and woken you up and given you the secret knowledge that lets you pass the spheres, then when you die, the divine spark rises back up to the realm of spiritual light, and some said is reunited with the supreme being and becomes part of God, their God. Some said it just floats around in perfect spiritual light with the aeons. Again, it's unclear. Now, one of the ridiculous things that I mentioned before about the translucent fruit was some Gnostics thought that a good way to release light from the material world, he's eating a pear, was to eat translucent fruit and then break wind. And this would release the spiritual essence of the fruit to return to the realm of spiritual light. As I said, it got quite ridiculous. And one of the church fathers, this heresy lasted several hundred years, and one of them, named Augustine, started out being a Gnostic. And one of the things he did in his writings was to make fun of the Gnostics. And he especially made fun of this translucent fruit thing. One of the stories he told about the sins he had committed. Now, he did talk about his real sins too in a book called his Confessions. But one of the ways he made fun of the Gnostics was talking about himself as a child going with his friends and stealing a bunch of pears from his neighbor's orchard. Because remember, pears are translucent fruit, and they said the Gnostics said the pear is one of the places where the spiritual light is most plentiful. So eat pears and then break wind. Yes, they were that silly. He said, "Oh, we were so horrible. We took pears and we threw them to pigs," because according to the Gnostics, pigs were some of the most earthy and material and base creatures. So, oh, we took these translucent fruit with all their spiritual light and threw them to pigs and entrapped it even more in matter. Weren't we horrible? But he was mocking the Gnostics at that point. Anyway, I just think that's a funny story. Now, as I said, Gnosticism started among the pagans, not necessarily the Greek and Roman pagans, but remember that the whole world over to India had been Hellenized, so there was a lot of Greek influence there and a lot of Persian influence coming into the eastern part of the Greek-speaking world. So Gnosticism started among pagans, but it spread to Jews. There were Jewish Gnostics, and it spread to Christians. Some Gnostics became Christians, but not all the way, and said, "Oh yeah, we're Christians, but we still believe in this Gnostic stuff." And they said, "Well, this supreme being is the Father. And this spiritual messenger is Christ. And the demiurge, that's Jehovah, the God of the Old Testament." So they said the Father is not Jehovah, Jehovah is not the Father. Some of them even said that this spiritual messenger, the first spiritual messenger, was the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Now, those who claim to be Christians said that this spiritual messenger, Christ, didn't really become man. Some said Jesus was just a spirit. Who had the appearance of being a man. Others said, okay, there was a man, Jesus, but he was just a man. Wow, I'll try that again. And that this Christ possessed the body of the man Jesus. But then left him before the crucifixion. And was sitting in heaven laughing at the stupidity of the archons while the man Jesus was suffering and dying. You can see from this just what a horrible heresy this became when it infected the church. And it started to become a heresy among Christians around AD 100, as far as we can tell, maybe a little bit before, maybe a bit after, but it lasted into the 4th or 5th centuries. And later we'll talk about the church's response to all heresies, including this one. But you can see just how horrible this would be and how dangerous to faith. And we will continue with that another day.